I am 26 years old. My father passed away last week. Today was his funeral. I stood near the back of the quiet room, watching people offer their condolences to my older brother, Mark. He was the center of attention, the grieving son holding court. I was just a shadow he allowed to be present. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and sorrow. Every whisper felt like a shout. Every tear felt like a judgment. I never felt comfortable at large gatherings, and this was the worst one I could imagine. My suit felt too tight, a costume for a part I did not want to play. My father and I were close. We did not need grand gestures or loud declarations. We had a quiet understanding. We could spend hours in his workshop, sanding wood for a new project, and barely say a word. The silence was comfortable. It was filled with everything that needed to be said. He taught me how to fix things, how to be patient, how to see the value in something old and worn. He taught me how to be a good man. Mark was different. He and my father had a loud relationship, loud fights and loud, short-lived reconciliations. Mark was all about appearances, the expensive car, the perfect suit, the impressive job title he talked about more than he worked at. He saw our father's quiet nature as a weakness. He saw my bond with him as a threat. For years, Mark had made it clear he was the heir apparent. I was the spare part, the one who did not quite fit. As the service was about to begin, Mark walked over to me. His face was a mask of practiced grief, but his eyes were cold. They were always cold when he looked at me. He leaned in close, his voice a low hiss that no one else could hear. "What are you still doing here?" he asked. I was confused. I looked at the polished wooden coffin at the front of the room. "I am here to say goodbye to Dad," I said simply. Mark let out a small, bitter laugh. "He was not your dad. Not really," he whispered. His words were sharp little knives. "You were never the real son." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. My mind went blank. All I could hear was a ringing in my ears. I stared at him, trying to see if this was some cruel joke, some twisted way of grieving. But his expression was pure, undiluted malice. "You need to leave," he insisted, his voice hardening. "You are an embarrassment, a reminder of his charity case. I will not have you here, making a scene." I felt the eyes of our relatives on us. My Aunt Carol was watching with a concerned frown. My Uncle Ben was pretending not to notice. They all knew the tension between us. They had watched it simmer for 2 decades. I felt a hot wave of shame wash over me. He was doing this here, now, in front of everyone. "Mark, stop it," I mumbled, my voice barely audible. "I mean it," he said, his jaw tight. "Get out, or I will have you removed. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." He believed he had the right. He was the elder, the biological son, the one who bore the family name with pride while I just bore it. The thought was a fresh wound. What did he mean? Not the real son? Was this just a cruel insult or something more? My heart pounded in my chest. I felt dizzy. I looked towards the front of the room, at the coffin. A desperate, silent plea to my father. "Help me." I decided to go. I would not cause a scene at my father's funeral. I would not give Mark the satisfaction. I took a deep breath, held my head high, and turned to walk away. I would grieve alone. I would say my goodbyes in the quiet of my own home, not in this cold, hostile room. I took one step, then another. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone was watching me retreat, the prodigal son being cast out. Then it happened. A loud thud echoed from the front of the room. It was a solid, heavy sound that cut through the somber quiet. Everyone gasped. Heads turned towards the source of the noise. It came from the coffin. A tremor ran through the polished wood. Then another. The coffin began to shake. It was not a violent shaking, but a steady, rhythmic vibration. A low hum started, a mechanical sound that did not belong in a place of rest. People started to murmur, their hushed whispers turning into panicked chatter. My Aunt Carol let out a small scream. The funeral director, a man named Mr. Thompson, rushed forward, his face pale with shock and confusion. Mark spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. He stared at the coffin, then his gaze snapped to me. His face contorted with rage. "What did you do?" he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "What is this? Some kind of sick joke?" I was frozen in place, my feet rooted to the floor. I could not speak. I could only stare at the impossible sight before me. The coffin. It was still vibrating. The rhythmic hum grew slightly louder. I had done nothing. I had no idea what was happening. But in that moment, as my brother accused me in front of everyone, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This was not my doing. But somehow, I knew it was for me. The shaking continued for another 10 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it began. The hum died away. The silence that followed was more profound than before. Everyone held their breath. And in that silence, a distinct click echoed through the room. It was the sound of a lock disengaging. On the side of the coffin, a small seamless panel that I had not noticed before slid open with a soft whirring sound. Inside the newly revealed compartment, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were 2 items: a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax, and a small, sleek digital audio player with a set of earbuds neatly wrapped around it. The funeral director stared, speechless. Mark took a hesitant step forward, his anger momentarily replaced by a look of greedy curiosity. Mr. Thompson finally found his voice. "I do not understand," he stammered, looking from the coffin to Mark, then to me. "I have never seen anything like this. This is highly irregular." Mark ignored him. He lunged forward and snatched the items from the compartment. He held them up as if they were trophies. "This is family business," he announced to the room, his voice regaining its authority. "A final message from my father. To me." He started to tear open the envelope. I found my voice. "It is for both of us," I said, my tone clear and steady. The words came out stronger than I felt. Mark paused, his thumb under the seal. "What?" he sneered. "Look at the envelope," I said. I had seen the writing from across the room. My father's neat, architectural script. Mark's eyes flickered down to the envelope in his hand. His face fell. Written on the front, in our father's familiar hand, were 2 words: "My sons." Plural. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gathered mourners. Aunt Carol was now looking at Mark with an expression of disapproval. Uncle Ben was finally paying attention, his brow furrowed. Mark's public shaming of me had backfired. The script had been flipped by a ghost in the machine. "This is a private matter," Mark snapped, clutching the envelope and the player to his chest. He shot a glare at the funeral director. "We need a room." Mr. Thompson, eager to regain control of the situation, nodded quickly. "Of course. Right this way, gentlemen." Mark started to walk towards a side door, but he paused and looked back at me. His eyes were filled with a frustrated, cornered kind of hatred. "You," he spat. "Come on." I followed him. I was no longer retreating. I was being summoned. As I walked past the rows of stunned faces, I felt a new strength in my legs. The shame was gone, replaced by a burning curiosity and a sliver of hope. My father had not abandoned me. He had left one final project, one last puzzle. And it was beginning right now. We were going to find out what was in that box, and I had a feeling Mark was not going to like it. The room Mr. Thompson led us to was small and stuffy, furnished with a single table and 3 chairs. It smelled of old paper and dust. Mark threw the envelope and the audio player onto the table as soon as the door closed behind us. He began pacing back and forth like a caged animal. I just stood there, watching him, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "This is your fault," he seethed, whirling to face me. You must have put him up to this. Some sentimental nonsense. I knew nothing about this, Mark, I said calmly. You saw my face. I was as shocked as you were. Do not lie to me, he shot back. You were always his favorite. The quiet, obedient little project. He probably thought this was a clever way to make me play nice with you. His words still stung, but they had lost some of their power. The coffin, the message, my father's careful planning, it was all a shield. He addressed it to both of us, I said, pointing to the envelope. Maybe we should see what he wanted to say. Mark glared at the items on the table, then back at me. He was trapped. He could not open it without me. Not without directly disobeying the written instruction everyone had seen. With a frustrated sigh, he slumped into one of the chairs. Fine, he grumbled. Let's get this over with. I sat down opposite him. The small table felt like a vast battlefield. I picked up the audio player. It was simple, with only a play button and a volume control. I unwrapped the earbuds. I held one out to him. One for you, one for me, I said. He snatched it from my hand without a word. I placed the other one in my ear. For a moment, we just sat there, connected by a thin white wire, the silence stretching between us. I looked at my brother, at his angry, resentful face, and felt a pang of sadness. We were the only family each other had left, and we were miles apart. I pressed the play button. A soft hiss filled my ear, and then a voice. Dad's voice. It was so clear, so real. It was like he was in the room with us. Hello, boys, he said. His tone was warm, but there was an undercurrent of weariness to it. If you are hearing this, then I am gone. I hope my departure was peaceful, and I hope you are listening to this together. I glanced at Mark. His eyes were closed, his jaw clenched. Hearing Dad's voice was hitting him, too. I have a few things to say. Dad's voice continued. Things I should have said when I was alive. But I was a coward. It was always easier to build things than to have difficult conversations. He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. Mark, I love you. You are my son, and I have always been proud of the man you could be. Mark flinched at the phrasing. Could be. But your ambition, your need for more, it has always worried me, Dad said. You measure worth in dollars and status. I tried to teach you that real worth is in your character, in how you treat people, especially your family. Another pause. Then, Leo, Dad said, and my breath caught in my throat. I love you, son. From the moment I held you, you were mine. There is something you need to know, something Mark recently learned and that I fear he will use against you. My heart started to pound. This was it. Leo, you are adopted, Dad's voice said gently. Your mother and I could not have children after Mark was born. We wanted another child so badly. We chose you. Out of all the babies in the world, we chose you. You were not a charity case. You were a gift. Our greatest gift. Tears pricked my eyes. I was not sad. I was overwhelmed. The puzzle piece I never knew was missing had just clicked into place. All the little things, the lack of baby photos of me before the age of 2, the vague answers about my birth. It all made sense. But hearing it from him, framed in love, it was not a wound. It was a confirmation. I was chosen. I told Mark this a few weeks ago. Dad continued, his voice turning grim. I was sick, and I knew my time was short. I told him because I wanted him to understand the depth of our family, that it was built on love, not just blood. I hoped he would finally see you as his true brother. I see now that I may have been naive. The recording went silent for a beat. Mark, I know what you were going to do today. I know the words you would say at my funeral. I know you would try to cast Leo out. Because to you, he is not real. But his place in this family was never conditional. Mark opened his eyes. They were filled with a furious, defensive light. He looked like he wanted to rip the earbud out, to smash the player. In the envelope, you will find a letter, Dad's voice instructed. It is not my will. That is with my lawyer, Mr. Harrison. This is something different. A final test. My inheritance, the business, the house, everything is conditional upon the outcome of this test. Mark's head snapped up. His greed overcame his anger. A test? He muttered. Read the letter. Together, the recording concluded. And remember, I love you both. Try to love each other. The audio ended with a soft click. I pulled the earbud from my ear. The silence of the stuffy room rushed back in. I looked at Mark, who was staring at the envelope on the table as if it held the secrets to the universe. He had been right about one thing. Dad was trying to make him play nice. But it was not a game. It was a test, and the stakes were everything he had ever wanted. He slowly reached for the envelope, his movements stiff. He broke the wax seal with his thumb and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it and began to read, his eyes scanning the page quickly. I waited for him to share it, but he just kept reading, his expression growing darker with every line. What does it say? I finally asked. He looked up at me, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. He was a crazy old man, he whispered, completely insane. Mark, let me see it, I said, my voice firm. He hesitated for a second, then shoved the letter across the table at me. Here, he spat. See for yourself. He's playing games with us from beyond the grave. I picked up the letter. It was written in the same neat script as the envelope. My dearest sons, it began. As you now know, my will is not as straightforward as you might have imagined. I have spent my life building a legacy, not just a business, but a family. A family I expect to endure with honor and integrity. This is my final attempt to ensure that happens. Mark, I have watched you for years. I have seen your ambition curdle into greed. I have seen you treat your brother as a rival, not as family. Leo, I have seen your quiet strength, your compassion, and your loyalty. These are the qualities upon which our family's legacy should be built. Therefore, I have set a small scavenger hunt for you. The entirety of my estate is tied to its successful completion, and it must be completed together. The first clue is this. To find the key, look to the place where we found warmth as a family, the heart of our home, where a secret known only to a boy and his father has been kept safe from the flames. The letter ended there. No other instructions, no explanation, just a riddle. I read it twice, my mind racing. A place of warmth, the heart of the home, safe from the flames. It was obvious. He was talking about the fireplace in our childhood home, and the secret known only to a boy and his father. I remembered it instantly. When I was about 10 years old, I had found a loose brick in the back of the hearth. I had shown it to Dad, excited by my discovery. He had smiled and told me it would be our secret hiding place. We used to leave little notes for each other there. It was one of my fondest memories, a secret just between us. The fireplace, I said out loud, in the old house. Mark looked at me, a flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe just calculation, in his eyes. The fireplace? What are you talking about? There is a loose brick in the back, I explained. Dad and I used it as a hiding spot when I was a kid. He must have hidden the key there. Mark stood up abruptly. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. He was already heading for the door, his mind fixated on the prize, the inheritance. He did not care about the sentiment, about the memory. He just wanted the key. Mark, wait, I said. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, and turned back to me, impatient. What now? Did you hear what he said in the recording? I asked, my voice quiet. He said he loved us. He said he chose me. Mark scoffed. He said a lot of things. He was old and sentimental. It does not change anything. Now are you coming, or are you going to sit here crying about your feelings? The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He had heard the same loving message from our father, and it had meant nothing to him. All he heard was the part about the money, the conditions, the test he was now being forced to take. I felt a cold resolve settle in my stomach. Dad knew. He knew Mark would be like this. This whole thing, the shaking coffin, the audio message, the scavenger hunt. It was not just a test for Mark. It was a message for me. It was a warning. And it was a set of tools. I am coming, I said, standing up. But let's be clear about something. The letter says we do this together. That means we are partners in this. 50-50. No more talk about real sons or who belongs where. We are in this together, or we are not in it at all. I was setting a boundary. For the first time, I was dictating terms to him. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowed. I could see the gears turning in his head. He needed me. I had the key to the first clue. He had no choice but to agree. Fine, he said. The word clipped. Together. Now let's go. I want this over with. He turned and walked out of the room. I followed him, leaving the letter and the audio player on the table. We walked back through the reception hall where the funeral was supposed to be continuing. It had paused. People were standing in small, quiet groups, whispering. They all stared as we walked past them and out the front doors into the bright, cold afternoon. The drive to our childhood home was silent and tense. Mark drove his expensive sedan too fast, weaving through traffic with an aggressive impatience that mirrored the turmoil in his mind. I sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the familiar streets. My thoughts a whirlwind. Adopted. I kept turning the word over in my mind. It did not feel like a negative. The way Dad had said it, filled with so much love and intention, it felt like an honor. We chose you. It explained the subtle, unspoken distance I sometimes felt from Mark and his side of the family. It explained the fierce, protective way Dad had always treated me, as if he were guarding a precious treasure. The house was just as I remembered it. A sturdy two-story colonial at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street. It had been empty since Dad had moved into a smaller, more manageable apartment a year ago, after his health began to decline. Mark parked in the driveway and we got out. The air was still. The house looked like it was holding its breath. Mark strode to the front door and fumbled with his keys. I hope this still works, he muttered. The lock clicked and the door swung open into the dusty, quiet entryway. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating floating dust motes. The house smelled of old memories. The fireplace is in the den, I said, leading the way. The den was at the back of the house. The furniture was all covered in white sheets, looking like a gathering of silent ghosts. The centerpiece of the room was the large brick fireplace. It was cold and dark now, but I could so easily picture a fire roaring in it. Dad sitting in his favorite armchair, me on the floor with a book. I knelt down on the hearth, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. I reached inside, my fingers searching for the familiar rough edges of the brick. My hand closed around it. It was still loose. I wiggled it back and forth, and it came free from the wall, just like it had all those years ago. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a small, old-fashioned brass key. Tied to it with a piece of twine was another folded note. Mark, who had been watching over my shoulder with hawk-like intensity, immediately reached for it. "Give me that," he demanded. I held it up out of his reach. "Together, remember?" I said, my voice even. "We read it together." He gritted his teeth, his frustration palpable. "Fine, read it." I untied the note from the key and unfolded it. It was another message from our father. "Well done, Leo. I knew you would remember. This key is for a safe deposit box at the downtown branch of Sterling National Bank. The box number is 713. However, the bank has specific instructions. The box requires two things to be opened: this key and a second form of identification. An item that proves your origin, Leo. An item I have kept safe for you your entire life." It is the original copy of your adoption certificate. Mark, I am telling you this so you understand. You cannot do this without your brother. You need him, just as he has always needed you. The certificate is in my old desk, in the hidden compartment you never found. Your final task in this house is to find it, together. Perhaps in searching for it, you will learn to see things from a different perspective. I finished reading and looked up at Mark. His face was a thundercloud. He was not just angry anymore. He was incensed. He was being made to jump through hoops, and each hoop was a reminder that he was not in control. Worse, he was being made dependent on me, the person he had just tried to discard. A hidden compartment? He snarled. He and his stupid games. Where is the desk? In his study, I said, folding the note and putting it in my pocket along with the key. We went to the study, another room draped in ghostly white sheets. Mark ripped the sheet off the large oak desk in the center of the room. He started yanking open drawers, rummaging through them impatiently. Papers, pens, and old receipts went flying. Stop it, I said. You are just making a mess. He said it was a hidden compartment. You're not going to find it by tearing the thing apart. Then how do you suggest we find it, genius? He shot back, slamming a drawer shut. I walked over to the desk and ran my hands over the smooth, worn wood. Dad had built this desk himself. It was one of his proudest creations. Like everything he built, it was both beautiful and functional. And it would have secrets. He loved secrets, puzzles, things that required patience to solve. He would not have made it obvious, I murmured, thinking aloud. It would be part of the design. I started examining the intricate carvings on the side panels. They depicted a forest scene, with trees and animals. My fingers traced the outline of a carved oak tree. I pushed on a knot in the wood. Nothing. I ran my hand along the base. I felt for seams, for lines that were not part of the grain. Mark watched me, his arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. Any century now, Leo. I ignored him. I thought about my father, how his mind worked. He loved symmetry, but he also loved a single, deliberate imperfection. The one thing that made a piece unique. I looked at the front of the desk. There were 2 sets of 3 drawers, one on each side. On the left pedestal, the bottom drawer had a simple brass knob. On the right pedestal, the bottom drawer had a matching knob. But as I looked closer, I saw that the small decorative plate behind the knob on the right was slightly different. It had one extra flourish in the engraving, an imperfection. I put my hand on that knob. Instead of pulling it, I tried to turn it. It would not budge. I tried turning it the other way. Still nothing. Mark let out an exasperated sigh. This is ridiculous, he said. Let's just break it open. No, I said firmly. That's not how Dad would want it. I looked at the knob again. Not pull, not turn. What else? I tried pushing it. I pressed it straight into the drawer face. With a soft click, it sank into the wood about half an inch. And then, on the side of the desk, a section of the carved paneling popped open. It was a shallow, hidden drawer, perfectly camouflaged. Mark stared at it, his mouth slightly agape. I will be damned, he muttered. I pulled the hidden drawer open. Inside, lying on a piece of faded velvet, was a single, important-looking document. It was old, the paper yellowed with age. At the top, in elegant script, it read, Certificate of Adoption. Below that, my name was written, along with my birth date and the names of my new parents, my father and my mother. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. It was real, tangible proof of what my father had told me. I was their son, chosen. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The last piece of my identity, the one I never knew was missing, was now in my hands. Is that it? Mark asked, his voice sharp, breaking the moment. Is that the paper? Yes, I said, my voice thick with emotion. This is it. Good, he said. All business. Let's go to the bank. I want this charade to be over. He did not ask to see it. He did not ask how I felt. He did not acknowledge the significance of the moment for me. To him, it was just another key to another door that stood between him and his money. I carefully folded the certificate and placed it in my jacket pocket, next to the note and the brass key. I felt its weight, a comforting presence. My father had not just left me a puzzle. He had left me my own story. And he had made sure that my brother would have to witness me claiming it. The drive to the bank was even quieter than the one to the house. Mark was stewing in a silent rage, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was lost in my own thoughts, replaying my father's words from the recording over and over again. You were not a charity case. You were a gift. The words were a balm on the fresh wound of Mark's earlier cruelty. We arrived at the downtown branch of Sterling National Bank 10 minutes before it was scheduled to close. It was an imposing building, with tall marble columns and heavy brass doors. It felt like a temple dedicated to money. Mark practically ran from the car to the entrance. I followed at a more measured pace. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old money and floor polish. Mark marched up to the nearest teller. We need to access safe deposit box 713, he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. The teller, a young woman with a polite but firm expression, looked at him over her glasses. Do you have an appointment, sir? No, we do not have an appointment, Mark snapped. My father, a longtime client, has passed away. We are here to retrieve the contents of his box. I am sorry for your loss. Sir, the teller said, her tone professional. But accessing a deceased client's box requires a specific protocol. I will need to see a death certificate and the appropriate legal documents proving you are the executor of the estate. Mark's face turned red. I do not have those with me, he said through gritted teeth. But we have the key, and we have instructions. From him. I stepped forward. Excuse me, I said, my voice calm. My father, Mr. David Miller, left very specific instructions with the bank regarding this particular box. He spoke with a manager here a few weeks ago. He said the box could be opened with the key and a second, specific item of identification. The teller's expression softened slightly as I spoke. My calm demeanor was working better than Mark's aggression. Let me get my manager, she said. One moment. She disappeared into a back office. Mark shot me a venomous look. You love this, don't you? He hissed. All this drama, making me dance like a puppet. I am just following Dad's instructions, I replied evenly. The same as you. A moment later, an older, distinguished-looking man in a sharp suit emerged from the office. Gentlemen, he said, extending a hand. I am Mr. Reed, the branch manager. My colleague tells me you are here about Mr. Miller's box. I am so sorry for your loss. Your father was a wonderful man and a valued client. Thank you, I said, shaking his hand. Mark just grunted. Your father did indeed make special arrangements for this box, Mr. Reed continued. He was very clear. The key and a specific personal document. He said you would know what it was. We have them, I said. I pulled the brass key from my pocket and showed it to him. Then I carefully retrieved the adoption certificate from my other pocket. And this. I handed the certificate to Mr. Reed. He unfolded it and examined it carefully. He looked from the document to me, then back again. He nodded slowly. Yes, this is it. This is the document he described. Everything seems to be in order. He turned and led us through a heavy, circular vault door into a room lined with thousands of small metal boxes. The air was cold and still. He walked down an aisle and stopped in front of a small drawer labeled 715. The bank's protocol requires 2 keys to open any box, he explained. One held by the client and one held by us. He inserted his own key into one lock, then gestured for me to use mine. I stepped forward. The brass key feeling heavy in my hand. I slid it into the second lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and with a solid clunk, the drawer was unlocked. Mr. Reed pulled it open and lifted out a long, narrow metal box. "We have a private viewing room for you," he said, carrying the box with a practiced reverence. He led us to another small, quiet room, similar to the one at the funeral home. He placed the box on the table and then discreetly left, closing the door behind him. Mark and I stood on opposite sides of the table, staring at the metal box. This was it. The end of the scavenger hunt. The final answer. Mark reached for the lid, but I put my hand on it. "Wait," I said. "What is it now, Leo?" he asked, his patience completely gone. "I just want to say something," I said, looking him in the eye. "No matter what is in this box, no matter what Dad decided, what you said to me at the funeral was wrong, and I will not forget it." He stared at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. For a second, I thought he might actually apologize. But the moment passed. He just scoffed and pulled his hand back. "Are you done with your speech? Can we open it now?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, we can open it." I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no cash, no gold bars, no bearer bonds, just two items sitting on a bed of dark blue velvet. One was a thick leather-bound journal. The other was a slim, modern laptop computer. Mark's face fell. He had clearly been expecting treasure. "What is this?" he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "A diary and a computer? This is the inheritance?" I reached into the box and lifted out the journal. The leather was soft and worn. On the cover, in gold embossed letters, were two words: "For my sons." I opened it to the first page. It was my father's handwriting again, neat and precise. "If you're reading this," the first entry began, "it means you have worked together to get here. I hope the journey was not too difficult. I hope it gave you time to think. What you hold in your hands is a record of my life, my business, and my family. It is a book of accounts, but not the kind you might expect." I looked up at Mark. He was peering over my shoulder, his eyes wide with a dawning sense of dread. I turned the page. The next entry was dated 5 years ago. It was a detailed account of a loan my father had given Mark. A very large loan. "To cover his investment losses," my father had written. "He swore it was a one-time thing. He promised to pay me back." I kept turning the pages. Page after page was filled with similar entries. A bailed-out business venture. A series of urgent personal loans. Credit card debts paid off. A down payment for his flashy apartment. Each entry was meticulously documented, with dates, amounts, and sometimes even copies of signed promissory notes that Mark had apparently forgotten all about. My father had kept a perfect secret ledger of every dollar he had ever given Mark. It was not a few thousand here and there. It was a fortune. A staggering amount of money that Mark had burned through over the years, all while maintaining the facade of a successful, self-made man. "This is..." I trailed off, speechless. "This is nothing," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. "This is just a father helping his son. It was gifts." "He kept the promissory notes, Mark," I said quietly, pointing to one stapled to a page. "You signed them." Mark's face was ashen. He looked at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. He finally understood. This was not a treasure chest. It was a book of judgment. My eyes fell on the laptop. "What do you think is on that?" I asked. Mark did not answer. He just stared at the closed computer, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. I placed the journal back in the box and lifted out the laptop. It was light and cool to the touch. I opened it. The screen lit up immediately, showing a simple desktop with a single video file in the center of the screen. The file was labeled, "My Last Will and Testament." My hand was shaking as I moved the trackpad and double-clicked the file. The screen went black for a second and then an image appeared. It was my father. He was sitting in his favorite armchair in the den, the one now covered by a white sheet. He looked older than I remembered, and so tired. but his eyes were clear and full of a sad resolve. He looked directly into the camera, as if he were looking right at us. "Hello, boys," he said, his voice raspy but firm. The same words he had started the audio recording with, but this time they carried a much heavier weight. "If you are watching this, it means you have opened the box. It means you have the journal. And now you have this. My final word on the matter." He took a deep, shaky breath. "Leo," he said, his eyes seeming to find me. "My son, I am so proud of the man you have become. You are kind, you are honest, and you are strong in a way that matters more than money or power. I know learning about your adoption this way has been a shock, but I needed you to hear it from me. I needed you to know how much you are wanted, how much you are loved." He smiled, a sad, faint smile. "Because of who you are, because of your character, I am leaving the entirety of my estate to you. The house, the business, my savings and investments, everything. It is all yours, legally and irrevocably. Mr. Harrison, my lawyer, has the paperwork to make it so." I gasped. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. Everything? It was too much to comprehend. I looked at Mark. He was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked like he had been turned to stone. Dad was not finished. He turned his gaze slightly, as if looking at Mark, who would be standing on the other side of the table. "Mark," he said, and his voice lost its warmth. It was now filled with a profound, bone-deep disappointment. "I love you. You are my son. But I cannot, in good conscience, leave my legacy in your hands. You are not ready for it. Maybe you never will be." He gestured towards the side, as if indicating the journal that was sitting in the box. "For years I have enabled you. I have cleaned up your messes. I have funded your lifestyle. I have given you chance after chance to stand on your own 2 feet, to become the man I know you can be. And you have squandered every single one. The journal documents it all," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "The money I gave you, which you took without gratitude and spent without thought. By my calculation, the sum of those gifts and loans is roughly equal to half of my total estate. In effect, Mark, you have already received your inheritance. You just received it early. And you have already spent it." Mark made a choking sound. It was a strangled, desperate noise. "But I am your father," Dad said, his expression softening for a moment. "And I wanted to give you one last chance, a final test. I am a builder, after all. I believe in second chances, in rebuilding foundations." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into the camera. "I left a secondary will with Mr. Harrison. That will divide my estate equally between the two of you. My instructions to him were simple. He was to enact that will, the 50-50 split, on one condition: that you, Mark, treated your brother with dignity, respect, and love at my funeral. That you showed me, in my absence, that you had finally understood what family means." He paused. The silence stretched for an eternity. I asked Mr. Harrison to be present at the service. I asked him to observe. If you had welcomed your brother, grieved with him, and honored his place in our family, he would have torn up this video will and filed the other one. Dad's face hardened again, a look of grim finality settling over his features. "But I knew you, Mark. I knew your heart. I knew the jealousy and the bitterness you have held on to for years. I knew you would see my death as an opportunity to finally push Leo out, to claim what you believe is rightfully yours. Your cruelty to him today, your greed, it has sealed your fate. You failed the test. And in doing so, you have made your choice." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. I could not move. I could not breathe. I could only stare at the blank screen, the ghost of my father's words still echoing in the air. He had planned it all. Every single step. The shaking coffin was a trigger. The audio message was a warning. The scavenger hunt was a forced partnership. The journal was the evidence. And the video, The video was the sentence. It was not revenge. It was justice. A father's final heartbreaking attempt to save one son and protect the other. Then, the silence was shattered. Mark let out a roar of pure animalistic rage. It was a sound of such agony and fury that I flinched back. He slammed his fists on the table, the metal box jumping and the laptop sliding. "No!" he screamed, his face purple with rage. "No, he can't do this. He was a senile old man. This is your fault." He pointed a trembling finger at me, his eyes wild and unhinged. "You manipulated him. You poisoned him against me. This is all you're doing." "Mark, I did nothing," I said, my voice shaking. "You heard him. He did this because of what you did. Today. At the funeral." "Lies," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "It's all lies. This won't hold up in court. I'll fight this. I will fight you and I will win." He looked manic, his carefully constructed facade of the successful, controlled older brother completely shattered. All that was left was the raw, grasping greed and the petulant anger of a child who had just had his favorite toy taken away. Just then, there was a soft knock on the door. It opened, and Mr. Reed, the bank manager, peered in. Beside him stood another man in a conservative suit, holding a briefcase. I recognized him instantly. It was Mr. Harrison, my father's lawyer. He must have been waiting. "Is everything all right?" Mr. Reed asked, his expression concerned. We heard shouting. Mr. Harrison stepped into the room, his eyes calm and assessing. He looked at the open box on the table, at my pale face, and at Mark's contorted expression of fury. "I see you have received David's final message," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Mark spun to face him. "You," he snarled. "You were in on this. This is a conspiracy. I will sue you. I will sue the whole firm." Mr. Harrison did not flinch. He simply looked at Mark with an expression of pity. "It will not work, Mark," he said calmly. "Your father was of perfectly sound mind when he made these arrangements. We have medical evaluations to prove it. He documented every step of this process. The instructions he gave me regarding the 2 wills and the conditions of the test were recorded, notarized, and witnessed. Contesting this will only result in the journal, with its detailed accounting of your debts, becoming a matter of public record during the discovery process. Is that what you want?" The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Mark's tirade faltered. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He was checkmated. My father had thought of everything. He had built a fortress around his decision, and there were no weak points. Mark's shoulders slumped. The rage in his face dissolved into a look of utter, desolate defeat. He looked from the lawyer to me, his eyes pleading. The bully, stripped of his power, was now resorting to begging. "Leo," he said, his voice suddenly small, pathetic. "Leo, please. You can't let this happen. We're brothers. You can't take everything. Don't leave me with nothing." My heart ached. A part of me, the part that still remembered us as little boys playing in the yard, wanted to give in, to say, "Of course, Mark, we will figure it out." But then another memory surfaced. Clear as day. Mark's face, inches from mine at the funeral. The cold malice in his eyes, the hiss of his voice. "You were never the real son. Get out." He had not seen me as a brother then. He had seen me as an obstacle to be removed. He only saw me as a brother now that he needed something from me. I took a deep breath, the air in the small room feeling thick and heavy. I looked at my brother, the man who had spent a lifetime trying to make me feel small, and I felt a profound sadness. Sadness for him, for what he had become, and sadness for my father, who had to go to such extraordinary lengths to protect me from his own son. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "We are brothers." A flicker of hope ignited in Mark's eyes. "And this morning," I continued, my voice growing colder, "my brother told me I was an embarrassment. My brother told me I was a charity case. My brother tried to throw me out of our own father's funeral." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by shame. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Dad gave you everything, Mark, I went on. For years, he gave you everything you asked for. The journal proves it. And then he gave you one last chance. A simple test of your character. All you had to do was be a decent human being. All you had to do was treat me like a brother. And you could not even do that. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. This is not my decision, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I am not taking anything from you. This is the consequence of your own actions. You made this choice, Mark. You made it this morning when you decided that your greed was more important than our family. I turned away from him, breaking the last, fragile thread that connected us. I looked at Mr. Harrison, who was watching me with a look of quiet approval. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice clear and final. Please execute my father's will exactly as he intended. Mark let out a sob, a broken, wretched sound. It was the sound of a man who had just lost everything, and finally understood that he had no one to blame but himself. The confrontation was over. The power had shifted. The game my father had started was finally complete, and I had won. But standing there in that cold, silent room, it did not feel like a victory. It felt like an ending. Mr. Harrison nodded, a grave expression on his face. Of course, Leo. I will begin the process immediately. He gestured towards the metal box. We will need the journal and the laptop as part of the estate's official records. I carefully placed the laptop back in the box and closed the lid. It felt like closing a chapter of my life. A long, painful chapter. Mr. Harrison took the box from the table. He gave me a small, sympathetic smile. Your father would be proud of you, Leo, he said softly. He always was. He and Mr. Reed then turned to Mark, who was still slumped in his chair, staring at the empty space on the table where the box had been. Mark, Mr. Harrison said, his tone now formal and professional. I will be in touch with you regarding the settlement of your outstanding debts to the estate. As you are no longer a beneficiary, the promissory notes your father held are now assets of the estate, and the estate will be required to collect on them. It was the final nail in the coffin. Not only was he getting nothing, but the money he had taken for granted for years was now a debt he would be forced to repay. To me, or rather to the estate that was now mine. Mark did not respond. He just sat there, a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant man he had been just a few hours ago. Mr. Harrison and Mr. Reed exchanged a look, then quietly escorted him out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stayed in that small, quiet room for a long time, just breathing. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me began to fade, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. I felt like I had run a marathon. The events of the day played over and over in my mind. The funeral, Mark's cruel words, the shaking coffin, the scavenger hunt, the final devastating video. My father. He had orchestrated it all. A grand posthumous play with all of us as the actors. He had known Mark so well, had predicted his every move. It was the work of a master strategist, but it was born from the heart of a grieving father. A father trying to do right by both his sons, even if it meant being harsh with one to protect the other. After a while, I left the bank and took a taxi back to my small apartment. The world outside seemed to be moving in slow motion. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, but I barely noticed. The first thing I did when I got home was call my best friend, Sam. He knew about the tension with Mark, but he had no idea about the adoption or the drama of the day. I told him everything. From the moment Mark confronted me at the funeral to the final video will. I talked for almost an hour without stopping, the words just pouring out of me. Sam listened patiently, only interjecting with a wow or an "are you serious?" When I finally finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sam, are you there? I asked. I am here, he said, his voice full of awe. Leo, your dad was a legend, like a full-on mastermind legend. I let out a shaky laugh. I guess he was. And Mark? Sam continued, his tone hardening. What a piece of work. I am sorry, man. I know he is your brother, but he deserved that. He deserved every bit of it. I know, I said quietly. It just feels heavy. Of course it does, Sam said. You just found out you are adopted, inherited a fortune, and financially ruined your brother all in the span of about 6 hours. I would be worried if you were not feeling heavy. But you did the right thing, Leo. You honored your dad's wishes. You stood up for yourself. I am proud of you. His words were a comfort. Hearing someone else validate my actions made me feel less alone. We talked for another hour, and by the time we hung up, I felt a little lighter. The weight was still there, but it was more manageable. The next few days were a blur of legal paperwork and phone calls. Mr. Harrison was incredibly efficient. He guided me through the initial steps of probating the will and taking control of my father's assets. The business, a successful custom cabinetry workshop that Dad had built from the ground up, was now mine. The house I grew up in was mine. His savings, a considerable sum he had carefully invested over a lifetime, were mine. 2 days after the funeral, I got a call from my Aunt Carol. She was my father's sister, a woman who always preached the importance of keeping the peace in the family, which usually meant letting Mark have his way. Leo, dear, she said, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness. I just spoke with Mark. He is an absolute wreck. You can't imagine. I can imagine, I said dryly. He told me about your father's unusual will, she went on, choosing her words carefully. It's just so shocking. David was always such a fair man. This does not sound like him at all. It sounded exactly like him, I replied. He was a fair man, which is why he gave Mark exactly what he deserved. There was a tight silence. Leo, that is a terrible thing to say, she chided. Mark is your brother. He made a mistake. He was grieving. You can't hold it against him forever. You have to help him. You have all this money now. It would be nothing for you to set him up, to help him get back on his feet. It's what your father would have wanted. The hypocrisy was stunning. She was asking me to do the very thing my father had structured his entire will to prevent. Aunt Carol, I said, my voice dangerously calm. With all due respect, you have no idea what my father would have wanted. I do. I have it on video. He wanted me to be protected from Mark's greed. He wanted Mark to face the consequences of his actions. I am honoring my father's last wishes. If you have a problem with that, you have a problem with him, not me. She gasped, offended. Well, I never. There is no need to be so cold, Leo. I am just trying to hold this family together. This family fell apart this morning at the funeral when your nephew tried to throw me out, I stated. Where were you then, Aunt Carol? You were silent. Your silence showed me where you stand. So please do not call me again to plead Mark's case. He is on his own. I hung up before she could reply. My hand was shaking. I had never spoken to her like that before. But it felt good. It felt like I was finally building a fence around myself. A fence my father had given me the materials for. A week later, Mr. Harrison called me with an update. Mark has retained a lawyer, he said. They made some initial inquiries about contesting the will. My heart sank. And they have since withdrawn their inquiry? He finished. I took the liberty of sending his lawyer a courtesy copy of the journal's table of contents and a transcript of your father's final video message. I believe they quickly concluded that a court battle would be counterproductive for their client. He had shown them the ammunition, and they had retreated, just as Dad had planned. What happens to him now? I asked. Well, Mr. Harrison said, a touch of grim satisfaction in his voice. The estate is now formally requesting repayment of his debts. It totals, with modest interest, just over $700,000. Given his current financial situation, I suspect he will have to declare bankruptcy. He will lose the apartment, the car, everything. I was silent. It was a complete and utter downfall. It is what your father wanted. Leo, Mr. Harrison reminded me gently. He did not do it to be cruel. He did it because he believed it was the only way Mark might ever learn. A hard reset. I spent the next month sorting through my father's life. I went to the workshop. His tools were all there, hanging neatly on the walls. The smell of sawdust and varnish was comforting. I ran my hand over a half-finished cabinet. I knew I could finish it. He had taught me how. I decided to keep the business running. It was his legacy. It was my legacy now. I also moved into the old house. The white sheets came off the furniture. I aired it out, cleaned it from top to bottom. It did not feel empty anymore. It felt like home. In the study, I sat at the big oak desk my father had built. I ran my hand over the secret compartment I now knew how to open. One evening, I found an old photo album. I sat on the floor of the den in front of the cold fireplace and flipped through the pages. There were pictures of Mark as a baby, pictures of my mother and father, young and smiling. And then there I was, a photo of Dad holding a 2-year-old boy with big, curious eyes. Me. The caption underneath in my mother's handwriting read, "Our Leo, the final piece of our heart." Tears streamed down my face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude. I was not a replacement. I was not a consolation prize. I was the completion of their family. I never saw Mark again. I heard through the family grapevine that he had moved away after his bankruptcy was finalized. No one seemed to know where he went. He had burned every bridge. He was truly alone. Sometimes late at night, I think about him. I wonder if he ever learned the lesson my father tried so hard to teach him. I wonder if he ever understood that the real inheritance was never about the money. It was about a father's love. A love he had been offered freely his entire life and had only valued when it was gone. My father built things: houses, cabinets, a family. His final project was the most complex of all. He had to tear one part of his life down to its foundations to save the other. It was a brutal, painful, and necessary act of construction. He left me with a business, a house, and a fortune. But the real inheritance was the truth. The knowledge that I was loved, that I was chosen, that I belonged. Mark had spent his whole life trying to prove he was the real son. In the end, Dad made sure I knew that being the chosen son was what mattered most. Mark finally learned what it felt like to have nothing, and I learned that my father's love was the only inheritance I ever truly needed. The rest was just a bonus. I was at peace. I was home. And I was finally, truly, my father's son.